invite to put on their camera Richard Muraya from the Demography project in Kenya. They will give, hi Richard. So Richard will give a short introduction about this fantastic project in Kenya, which, as I said, is also piloted Open Data Editor, and then we will slowly transition to Romina after that. Richard, do you have slides that you need to share?
Yes, please. I have slides.
Yes. Okay. Now you should be able to do it. It's the button close to your camera.
Yes. Sorry.
And as for the previous speakers, if you want, start putting your notes in the notes. But what I meant is start putting your questions in the chat so that we can then grab them after this session for Richard. Thank you, Richard. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Richard Muraya from Kenya. I'm the Executive Director of the Demography Project. It's a small youth-led community-based organization, and we work using civic technology, citizen science, and environmental journalism to enhance sustainable natural resource management and responsibility. I would want to focus here on our motto, and our motto here is data is information, information is power, and power belongs to the people. So as you can see, our organization is based in a village setting, quite rural and remote, but we've found ways in how we can use technology to enhance our participation in climate action and sustainability. So onto how we work. We rely a lot on citizen-generated data and ownership of that data itself. So with that, we deploy scientific equipment, including air quality monitors, water quality testing kits, sound meters, weather stations, seismometers, amongst others, which again generate data for use by the communities who host this equipment. So it's more or less like a lease kind of arrangement where we organize groups who can be able to host this equipment, or households which can be able to host for a particular set of time. Then the data they generate can be able to inform perhaps how better they can improve habitability or resilience to climate issues. Number two is analysis of open government data. We are happy to have participated in the pilot of the ODE, and through that we've been able to conduct research and documentation of open government data sets on various issues. And what we are doing with that data is now we are publishing it or sharing it with our audience to make sure that we have some form of engagement towards responsible policy making processes. Number three is direct community and stakeholder engagement. We do this at a grassroots level, so we do this in form of community events where we can be able to inform ownership, how best communities can participate using technology and open data, how best they can be able to enhance participation in climate action, like I mentioned earlier, and as well as democratic processes. Lastly, now once we have all this data, we are developing it into open data dashboards. This has a mix of both open government data and citizen-generated data, because unfortunately, Kenya is amongst the countries which have significant data gaps in topical issues, including climate action. So we want to, again, publicize this data, make it in readable formats for our audience to take action using it. So I'll quickly show you how we've been able to enhance climate sustainability using our programs. Unfortunately, I'll need to start perhaps a quick overview of our projects. Our first one is called Mai Makwa. I'll elaborate further on it. It's on freshwater resource management. Our second project is called Infrastructure, and this is on air quality, meteorological data, amongst others. Number three is Bungeni. Bungeni is in Parliament, where we are doing parliamentary monitoring. And lastly, we have Mtandao, which is more or less digital literacy training for community groups. I'll touch a bit on Bungeni, which is one of the projects that we are working on. It's parliamentary monitoring, but at for the local assemblies that we are working with. These are 47 of them, where we are compiling all information regarding parliamentary proceedings so that you can open them up to the public. Bungeni is Swahili for in parliament, so we are proud that this is something that we've been able to pilot, and through ODE we've been able to analyze a lot of data that we've been working on, but unfortunately unable to compile within the last 2 years or so. So Bungeni is ongoing. It also includes domestic election monitoring as well as electro-civic education. This is how you are working with ODE, digitizing data sets, published data sets, which are not available online. So we've been working with the various responsible government bodies who have this in their archives, now digitizing all this data and bringing it to the public in form of open data for informed decision making, especially around electoral and democratic processes. So on climate and sustainability, our flagship program is called Mae Makwa. It's my indigenous language for my water. This project essentially uses open data and citizen science to enable communities who are classified as climate vulnerable, water scarce, and disenfranchised to access information on how best they can participate in freshwater resource management. And this is happening at a domestic level, in that the data that is generated, whether it's about water consumption, the cost of water from water service providers, all this data is enables households and communities make sense and make actions towards reducing their impact on the environment. So we've been working on this project for the last 3 years or so. And the reason why we chose specifically water is that, as you can see from your screen, for the past 30 years, the globe has seen increased freshwater usage. And you can see Kenya right here. And unfortunately, in sub-Saharan Africa, Kenya has been able to register the highest water withdrawal level over the past 30 years, meaning that we have less water available for domestic use as well as industrial use due to population pressure as well as climate change. Visualizing it better, if you look at it from a water tank level, water availability per person has decreased significantly from the year 1963 to this year, where we are actually below the threshold of water scarcity as defined by the United Nations. So basically what we want to do is now empower communities and households to make sense of water data at a domestic level so that you can enhance climate resilience. So our scope, I'll quickly rush through this. We are using the Internet of Things, that is wireless sensors, which can be able to monitor the level of water consumption, water storage levels within a household, and enable the occupants of that household make informed decisions on how to reduce their water usage as per each domestic activity. For example, laundry, you can estimate how much water you've used, so you can be able to reduce perhaps the amount of water you're using. We're also distributing water quality test kits, and through our dashboard, we are uploading calculators which can be able to empower households, again, calculate the cost of water, because this fluctuates greatly across Kenya. And this again helps to inform decision making at a personal and collective level with regards to participating in climate action. So quickly, I'll go through the gallery. This is just one of the setups that we have installed around our village, where we can be able to document how each household is using water. And again, this data is used at a domestic level. So we are empowering the household to make informed decisions using our technology. We're also doing water quality testing for various water bodies, both natural and man-made, including piped water in our households. Again, the disease burden from untreated water in Kenya is quite high. So we are trying to enhance, again, how communities can be able to take charge of the data that comes from how bad or badly contaminated their fresh water is, and what relevant action that can be taken. So that was on my Makwa. I'll go through our most impactful project, and it's called Infrastructure. It's a mixture of two words, infrastructure and tracker. So for this one, it's primarily looking at atmospheric resource management, as in you're looking at air quality, meteorological data, amongst others, and see how it affects habitability of our urban and rural centers. Our scope is quite large for infrastructure. We are looking at noise monitoring, air quality monitoring, both indoor and outdoors, installation of meteorological stations, participation in policy making around infrastructure development, as well as monitoring and auditing public infrastructure in Kenya, especially on roads development. So on outdoor air quality monitoring, we deploy portable air quality monitors, and and action cameras, so we can document real time from a pedestrian point of view how much exposure you have towards adverse air quality, smoke, dust, and other particulate matter. So then we publish all this onto YouTube, so that we want our communities as well as our audience to understand where exactly adverse air quality happens. So instead of having static air quality monitor installations, we're having it real time and have your own personal point of view, so that you can understand how best you can reduce your exposure to adverse air quality. For indoor air quality monitoring, we are working with households who are still relying on firewood, biomass, charcoal, among other sources of domestic energy, tracking how much exposure that especially women and girls face when undertaking domestic activities, and perhaps what remedial measures we can take to reduce that kind of exposure using, again, open data. Kenya is notorious for an unregulated public transport sector, and this characterized by very loud music. Again, there's a strong link between loud noise, mental health issues, as well as other physiological issues. So we are working with our equipment, again, to track how noisy our public transport systems are, and again advising the owners of these buses to again take remedial measures to reduce the level of noise, and as well, again, to ensure that we do not have adverse effects on our passengers of these public transport vehicles. Second last, we have installed a number of weather stations across our village and other areas around Kenya, which feed real-time meteorological data to the public, as well as globally through the internet. So again, we are working with communities to own this data and take remedial changes with regards to the climate itself. So we issue bulletins, especially on extreme weather events, whether we're looking at extreme ultraviolet radiation, extreme heat, or very high rainfall events. So again, we are sharing this with the public for free to make sure that we have some informed action. Lastly, we do seismic assessments. Again, our village, unfortunately, in as much as we are remote, we've seen encroachment with regards to quarries, as well as other mining activities in our area. And due to blasting and other unregulated activities, you find that most of these effects are harming not just the environment itself, but also the houses themselves by damaging their foundations, amongst others. So we are doing seismic assessments with a geological partner who has equipment, who again shares this information with the owners of the homes, as well as the quarry owners, to ensure that we have some semblance of action that can be taken to reduce the structural effects against our homes, amongst others. So for milestones over the past years, we've achieved quite a lot with the few resources that we've been able to mobilize, but we are looking forward to expanding our project, not just in our village or our region, but nationally, to ensure that we have a better understanding of how the interface between human beings, our habitats, and the environment can play with regards to climate and sustainability. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. That was great. I don't see many questions in the chat yet, but please, if you have any, just write them down. I propose, since the two presentations are actually bound, that maybe Romina can join us on stage. And basically, Romina, who's the product owner of Open Data Editor that Richard has been using in his organization in the past 6 months, will be giving you an overview. Richard will come back to questions if there are any, basically after Romina's presentation. Okay? Thank you very much. Romy, go ahead.
Sarah, can you give me permission?
Yes,
to present. Hi, everyone, by the way.
Here you are. Now you should be able.
Thank you. Okay, so before we start, when we started thinking about this presentation, a couple of things that came to my mind were some lessons or reflections that we have while we started building the Open Data Editor. So this is more about, and you will see that the slides contain a couple of reflections, quotes in terms of our process, and in connection with sustainability. Let me share my screen, 1 sec. Can you see my slides? Yes, right?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So a little bit of context. I know that Richard already mentioned this, but the Open Data Editor is a tool that we are building at Open Knowledge Foundation to help non-technical users ingest tables in the app and detect errors in an easy way without needing coding skills to do it. First reflection, what we learn is, of course, that we need to build simpler technology. I think this is a message that a lot of our speakers have been repeating across all sessions. But why is that? I mean, because there's this idea that you build a product, and if you build it, people will come, technical users will contribute to the code, and everything will work in a magical way. But what we discovered is that, and because we started building this product with the community, is that it was complex to start integrating the feedback or make changes into the application, because the structure that was, based to build the application was complex. So we started simplifying that. I mean, no, Romina didn't do it. Basically, it was Patricio and also Nicolas, our developer. So it's simplifying the code that allowed us to start building something lighter and also implementing the feedback of the community to specifically solve this issue into the application. The second thing that we learned, again, in connection to sustainability, is that language matters. And why language matters? Because there are a lot of applications and tools that are extrapolating code language into the front end or the application for non-technical users. So if people find instructions, buttons, and functionalities or workflows complex, it's complicated for them to keep using the tools that we are creating. So one of the challenges that we faced during the project was trying to be a kind of translators of that technical language into plain language for non-technical users. And again, this is in connection to sustainability, because again, if you want to build things that will work for people, will solve real problems for people, you need to think about how you are communicating this. And in some projects, we are underestimate communication and when we are building these tools to solve problems in real life. We also need to think about building apps that work in different contexts. And for instance, Richard mentioned several projects that he has been working on where you need to conduct field work and you don't have internet connection. Your computers cannot be like as powerful as in other contexts. So in this case of the Open Data Editor, this is an app that people can download. Data is kept private in the app, but you also don't need internet connection to use it. The other thing is that, and again, in this context and the ecosystem where NGOs and everything's changing, not all organizations can afford data or tech teams. And that's, this is something obvious, but at the same time, I don't think we repeat this like as many times as we should. because data and tech teams are expensive, and also everyone is trying to reinventing the wheel. So why don't we start like talking to each other, thinking about the projects or initiatives that we have built to try to think how we can enhance those projects and not reinvent the wheel because we want to build something new. So one of the things that we did before we started the project is to conduct research to understand what other products that were similar to the ODE were in place in our ecosystem, trying to find differences, also common points, etc. Again, obvious, but I think this is part of what I will mention after this, the invisible work that we have to do in order to build sustainable tools. And also important, again, do not address all problems are technological problems, because they are not. We tend to think that if users do not use an app, that's because there's a problem with the app or there's a problem with the tool. And again, it's super important to build the tools collaboratively with the communities, to listen to their needs, to their needs, to avoid assumptions, but also because in the Open Data Editor project, what we discovered is that although we were communicating the app as an app for non-technical users, we needed to enhance people's data skills to allow them to get the most out of the app. So we thought about building and preparing a course that Open Knowledge Brazil created. And while conducting different pilots, we asked some organizations to take the course to see if they, by taking the course, they would enhance their data skills and they would understand the app better. And that was the case. So again, this was not a technological problem. This was something to think about, again, out of the box, and think about what are other aspects that you should take into consideration when building tools. Invest time in what appears to be for everyone the invisible work. Why I'm talking about this? When we started working in the Open Data Editor last year, we spent around 1.5 months without writing a single line of code. Why we did this? Because basically before I started implementing changes, we went to communities, people working with data, journalists, activists, researchers at NGOs, and we start asking them questions. How do you work with data? What do you do? What are your main challenges? That invisible work in terms of research, interviews, gave us a lot of insights to then go to the app and start thinking what we needed to change in the app. And sometimes organizations feel like they need to show work very fast and quickly, and this invisible work is not a priority at the beginning of the project. So I encourage you to think about what are aspects that are softer, that are not connected to the technical aspects, but at the same time that are necessary for your projects and sustainability. Sustainability is also about questioning your own assumptions. I have something to share here, something that happened in the Open Knowledge team when we started working, and this is connected to language. For some of us, the data validation concept was something super transparent. And I was like, I'm not sure that this is clear for non-technical users, but again, because we have been working in data for so many years, we tend to see some terms as obvious and transparent, but they are not for non-technical people. So what we decided to do is to question that assumption that we have in terms of, hey, data validation, it's clear, it's about checking things, checking data, and finding errors in the data. And what we did was to circulate a survey to ask people what they understood by basically data validation. And only one person, a technical one, was able to explain what data validation meant. So again, start questioning all the things that you bring into the table that you think are super obvious, but that can be problematic for your project. And also picking your battles. And one of our battles was Microsoft Excel, in the sense that people started requesting changes in the app based on Microsoft Excel functionalities. But we tried to be very clear in the sense that this is an app to check errors. This is not an app to with a lot of edit permissions, because the idea is for the user is to have an overview of the problems in the table and then move to other softwares to clean the data. So basically what we understood again is that the app could be a kind of intermediary to check errors, and then users will go to different softwares, and that's okay. I mean, we cannot fight against Microsoft because we don't have the power of Microsoft, we don't have the resources of Microsoft. So we wanted to concentrate specifically on the product vision and mission of the app, which was checking errors in tables. Is that diversity in teams matters, and this is something that we have been repeating for a long time, but it's important that you start thinking about not only integrating technical profiles with people with less technical skills, with soft skills, but also people from different regions, because they will bring their own perspective into the table, and you will have super interesting discussions based on their experience. So it's not only about the professional background, but also saying things like, hey, this is what is happening in my region, in my country, and this could be something where the tool could not function perfectly or something like that. And that would be it. I don't know if I use my 5 minutes, Sarah.
Yes, thank you very much, Romy. That was great and perfectly complementary to the talk that Richard gave. So there are 2 questions actually that were asked for Richard. Richard, I will just ask you to be very synthetic because we're very late on schedule. Basically, the first one is, how did the politics or decision makers respond to your activities? And if you could maybe share a little bit more about that. Richard, I don't know if you can come back on stage if you're still there.
Yes, indeed, I'm here. Our challenge with working or sharing our data with the government is that the regulations themselves do not really favor citizen-generated data. I'll give an example. Last year, Kenya passed an amendment to the Meteorological Act, which not only bans the publishing of citizen-generated data, but actually criminalizes the process. So you find that most government agencies are not too keen on having quote unregulated partners sharing this kind of information with the public. That is for citizen-generated data, that is. But for open government data, this is rather flexible. But again, we really need to work with our partners, including the Ombudsman of Kenya, to ensure that such organizations or government agencies comply with freedom of information requests. So other than that, the relationship is kind of distant because, again, for them to see the necessity of working with grassroots communities like ours needs a form of a financial benefit between both organizations. Either we be able to share not only our capacity but our equipment with them, as well as our technical expertise. So we find that kind of arrangement strains small organizations like ours. So sometimes we have to forego the aspect of working with governments directly, going with citizen-generated data, again, to achieve the impact that you're seeking to achieve.
Thank you, Richard. The second question was from Vasiliki, and it's in the chat. It's basically if you could share some use case examples of who is using the data that you produced. If you don't mind, I will ask you to maybe answer the question in the chat so we can move on to the next speakers because we're very late on the schedule. But thank you very much, Richard, and thanks, Romy, as well. Thanks, Romina. Both presentations were great. If you have any questions for any of them, please write them in the chat. And now I propose that maybe we move on to Christian Medina from Open North, Ouvert. Christian, are you there?
Hi. Hey, yeah, hi, how are you?
Good. Do you need to present? Do you want to share slides or not?
Yeah, I do have some slides.
Okay, let me quickly make you present. Here you are. There should be a button close to the webcam button, and you can share your screen from.
All right. True. All right, let's get starting. Let me go in slideshow mode. Okay, cool. So I'll get started, and I realize that I have to be brief, so I'll do my best. Though if you've heard me speak, I'm not that good at being brief, but I'll do my best. So, hi, my name is Medina. I work for an organization called Open North. We're based in Canada, hence why I have a nice image of a very cold cabin, because it's cold here. Not right now, but usually it's very cold. So today, and talking to Lucas about this, I kind of wanted to share the concept of data hubs. It's something we've been playing around a little bit with some of our partners. And it's basically the infrastructure that holds data sharing together. So, we know that usually when we talk to some of our partners, they're very on board with the idea of opening their data or sharing their data. But we run into some challenges on hesitating to participate in open government portals because some of their data might be too sensitive, or they just plain don't. There's a very strong power asymmetry on who controls the platform and themselves. And then so we started playing around with this concept a little bit. That's what I'm going to talk about today. Just a little bit about Open North for those folks who don't know us or haven't heard of us. So we're just a group of Canadian nerds, basically, that are really into data. So we think a lot about the decisions around data, who's sharing data, how it's being shared. And that leads us to talk a lot about law and ethics and governance and data governance and technology surrounding data. So that's us. Feel free to reach out. I see a couple of familiar faces in the crowd, so it's nice to see you guys, and I already said hello to some of you. So getting back to kind of what we want to share today is this concept of how do we share the data from a very basic standpoint. Again, people are like, okay, I know that standards are important. I know that I need to clean up the data, but what about the platform? What about where it's shared? And a lot of you are familiar with platforms, open source platforms like CCAN, where it's great because it's open source. It's accessible. It's not very expensive, but there's still a cost, right? There's still an ongoing cost to sustaining, maintaining the data, and then so when we're thinking about the sustainability of these kind of platforms, of these technological platforms, even if they're open source, we started thinking about the long term. In like 5 or 10 years, like who's going to keep this up? Who's going to pay for the hosting? Who's going to pay for changes in the ecosystem? For example, if a new privacy law comes into effect, who's going to make sure that the data that's there is meeting up to the necessary standards? And the last one we think a lot about is staff turnover. So from the previous presentation, like it is clear that it's difficult for teams, particularly in the community, to maintain that institutional knowledge. And especially when it comes to technology, often a lot of the organizations we work with don't have their own IT team, don't have the expertise, so they rely on outside consultants for some of their IT services. And just as an example, like I work directly a lot with women's shelters and organizations that are very front-serving to communities that are already vulnerable. Like they don't really have time to think about the platform or the CCAN infrastructure sustaining some of their shared data because they have to find a bed for a woman that's escaping the situation of violence for the night, right? Like, it really resonates when folk talk about not all problems need a tech solution. And that's true. And that's important to us to know our positionality in that context, that even though we know that sharing data will benefit our understanding of gender-based violence or of the environment, it's still not the solution, right? There's many other solutions that we need to support, and we need to find ways to support that. So, I won't go more over the challenges. Like I think you're all very familiar with this. Lack of standardization, skill gaps, no money, no time, no personnel. And then so thinking about this with our partners, again, a lot of them front-serving, service-providing organizations, we came up with this idea of a data hub. So I've seen the term thrown around a little bit, but so just to frame it, so a data hub is a CCAN instance that is managed by one central organization that has different projects. What we like about this when we work with folk that are not technical is that it really helps with some of those challenges that would cost them a lot of money. So if they were to build their own CCAN instance managed by themselves or separated from others, they're in charge of hosting, they're in charge of security. It gets tricky with project budgets and with budget that's available. I'll talk a little bit about the climate stuff. Just I saw the comment on Peter, because we do an example of climate for this. So yeah, as I was mentioning, it helps address some of the challenges that a lot of these organizations face. I think more importantly, the power dynamic that exists in sharing some of their data, but not keeping ownership of it or having to work with government so that government maintains open data portals is very much addressed. The other one that we find very interesting is development of future futures. So often a lot of organizations will come to us and say like, oh, we want to do this with our data in the future, or we want to do that with our data. Trying to coordinate that with a large government that holds open data is really complicated, right? Like they can download the data and they can use it in different ways, but it becomes complicated when there's not that one-stop shop for all their data. So that's kind of the process we're doing. Just to give you an example in the graphic that's there, like we have several projects, one on gender, one on climate, one on urban mobility, and one on food security. The idea would be that these organizations, have their own data that maybe they don't feel comfortable opening, but they do want to share it with other folk in the sector because they know it's beneficial. By them going directly to this Open North managed instance of CCAN, they're able to share their data with data sharing agreements, right? That they all agree, instead of having to negotiate with every sector that's publishing data in one government platform. They're able to like tailor those data sharing agreements with folk they know in their own sector, right? So if I'm a climate change activist, then I can talk to the energy utilities company. That's an easier negotiation for data sharing than having to go through the city of Montreal. And then the city of Montreal has to go through everyone. And then they have to go through legal. And then they have to share, change how data is being shared. And then so that's kind of our thinking behind offering this data hub to different clients in different sectors. Again, it also helps ease some of that burden of how am I gonna make sure that data is standardized if I don't have a data team? How am I gonna make sure my data is able to meet the standards that are required for sharing and for it to be actually useful? Like we can work that out, obviously in consultation with them. And the final one that I would share is the ongoing cost. So by multiple people being tenants in this CCAN instance, we can reduce the hosting costs, right? If we have 10 projects, then each project can only, the cost for the ongoing maintenance goes down because we already have the CCAN instance. We don't have to build something from scratch. We keep adding to it and growing it. Of course, we do offer, if you want to build your own instance, that's fine, but we find this is a solution for folk that only have a couple of $1,000s to spend. I think I have time, so I'm not going to go over our approach. I think, you're all cool people, so you know how it works when you co-design and co-create with civil society organizations and members of the community. But I will talk a little bit about the ones we're working on. And this is more related to climate. So for us, the one we're working on right now in Montreal is for climate change. And then some of the challenges that we faced, as I've mentioned before, is the power differentials between those holding the data and those seeking to use the data. So what we found was like a lot of folk in civil society, especially climate change activists, were pretty distrustful of the data being published by government or the data being shared by big electricity companies, or we call it hydro in Canada, because a lot of our energy comes from hydroelectric dams. So by having a third party where we're able to say, like, listen, even the platform where the data is shared, where the data can be accessed, that's not held by government, that's held by a neutral third party that you all agree to. That helps with some of those challenges we face when negotiating data sharing and data opening. There's also different visions, right? The city has a mandate to publish data. That's fine, but some folk are hesitant to publish certain kinds of data because they might reveal private information about individuals. So energy consumption data, for example, can tell you when someone is at their house, because if they're traveling, they're not consuming as much data. Having this as an open data set raises a lot of concerns, especially for vulnerable populations, right? Because it can lead to people stalking other people, knowing what their movements are. And then the final one is legislative expectations. So in Canada, we're a federated system. So provinces, which would be the equivalent as states in the United States or departments in other contexts, they have their own legislation. In Quebec, which is the French-speaking part of Canada, they have very stringent privacy legislation called Law 25. Working with the existing open data portals in federal government becomes really tricky. So being able to circumvent that by having a highly localized infrastructure that's able to integrate a lot of these considerations in cybersecurity, in privacy, really helps speed up the process of sharing data. And timely data is good quality data. So that's kind of what we wanted to share in this crowd. We also have something similar in mobility, and it doesn't only relate to this very hard fields, but we also have a reproductive justice data hub, so data about abortion and access to reproductive care, which again has its own challenges, and there's a traditional mistrust of authorities in this area. So being able to have that outside of big tech companies, outside of governments that, even though they use open data portals and they use CCAN, there's still that challenge of mistrust in data sharing. And yeah, I think I powered through that, being conscientious of the time, but do let me know if there are any questions. Do feel free to reach out. Again, this is something that's in the works, so we're still figuring out. So I would love to hear reactions. Would love to hear your comments. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Thank you, Christian. That was absolutely amazing. You have actually a couple of questions that were asked in the notes. So I'm going to read the first one aloud. So someone is asking, how do you learn about how other intermediary organizations perform and sustain the work?
How do we learn from them?
It's unclear from how the question is tailored.
Okay.
So the person that maybe wrote the question, maybe they want to unmute themselves and ask it, or they're writing. Are there networks that you're part of that help you learn about other intermediate organizations?
So we do a discovery process. So we I call them connective tissue organizations. They were the ones we work mostly with. This is better illustrated by an example. So in the gender-based violence space, there is women's shelters, there's housing, there is clinics, there's hospitals, right? Like, we don't work directly with them because they have a lot of things to worry about. We do work with the Ending Violence Association of Canada, which is this awesome group of feminists in Ottawa that their whole mandate is to research gender-based violence, but they're social science researchers. They're not necessarily tech or data people. So we talk to them to learn how to connect with these different organizations that want to use data. In addition, because it's part of their mandate, it kind of eases the burden on them a little bit on not having to talk directly with the people collecting the data or using the data. But we talk more with those connective tissues organizations. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And the second question that you got is basically someone wanted to inquire a bit better about, so they wanted to know better if you have worked with the field of measuring carbon footprint of hydropower.
Yeah, so that would be part of the folk interested in the Climate Data Hub. I also have another hat, so I work for an air quality organization called OpenAQ. So they're also a data air quality data ingester. Air quality data aggregator. Yeah, that if you want to reach out, like we can do that. There's like technical challenges on the kind of data that's being shared, but that's part of the fun, right?
Great. Thank you, Christian. Thank you very much. If you have other questions for Christian, please feel free to ask them in the chat or put them in the notes. Christian, I thank you again for the great presentation. And now let's move on to the last person, but not the least, of this session, who's Manisha Priyadarshini. Are you here? From ProgramEarth. I think I see you, Manisha. If you can put your webcam on and come on stage. I don't think we can hear you. So if you go onto your settings, I think you're just in listening mode and you have to join as a speaker as well. Try maybe to refresh. Yes, sorry, big blue button is sometimes a bit hard to understand. So yeah, for the ones that are here for the Spotlight Session 3 and the speakers as well, we are a bit behind, as you probably have noticed, but this is the last presentation from the previous session. So we'll probably be starting with a 10 minutes of delay. This is just because all these projects are so interesting. So at least that's the upside of it. Okay, Manisha, I saw you're back online and now you should be as a speaker as well. So let's try now. You're muted. Oh, yes. Try now.
Are we?
Yes.
Live?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Do I have permission to share my slides?
Yes, it's the button close to the webcam. You should see it. That allows you to share your screen or a window. Do you see it?
Yes. It's so funny, in a past life I was a solutions engineer, and it's always funny where the share screen buttons are.
Yeah, it's always in a different place.
Hi everyone. Okay, great.
Oh. Hi, Emil. I think you're for the following session. We're a little bit late. We are 10 minutes late. So Manisha is presenting now, so we'll ask you to be back on stage in 10 minutes, if you don't mind.
All good. Good luck, Manisha.
Thank you so much, Emil. Well, hi, everybody. Without much ado, I'd love to kind of share with y'all a little bit about ProgramEarth. We are a large collective that's fostering the next generation of developers across the globe while building climate tech. I come here with the experience, both as an Indigenous person, someone who worked in the Californian government, worked at GitHub for 6-7 years, helping folks transition to building OSPOs and workflows for developer productivity. And currently I stand as the interim executive director here at ProgramEarth. I think often when we think about solving really big problems, it can, we're always trying to figure out where to resource that knowledge from. And I think, funny enough, what I've realized working in the climate space from different angles of policy, of tech, of grassroots, is that most of what I learned was actually not in the tech field or in a book. It was actually a lot of time spent with my grandma on the land. And I think as I made my way into understanding climate risks and climate events, I started to notice that a lot of our traditional ecological knowledge was missing from these data sets. And as we are looking at climate disasters today, there's a need to integrate that knowledge and have these sort of community climate cooperatives, as well as upskill the next generation to integrate what they know from their elders to different sets of tools and technology, and also research other organizations and OSPOs and governments to create this sort of collaboration. If you take away anything from this presentation, it's really the power of collaboration and how that collaboration should and can be made across all of the levels of our society to create more complete and scalable solutions. So, if you are, so there might be something here for you if you're like an NGO or you are a grassroots climate initiative who is looking for ways to get started in terms of collecting data. There might be something here if you are running a student org and really want to have that hands-on workforce development across the GIS industries, or just open source or cybersecurity architecture, or if you are like an OSPO across different entities, there's a lot of architecture here and playbooks here that you might be able to leverage. So I think, when we think about some of the milestones that have happened in the last 5 years, the power of collaboration has been that all of us from all of these different sectors, we've become united in the number one milestone we think here at ProgramEarth, which is returning nature back into conservation. So our goal when we started was 304 million hectares, which is what One Earth has in their thesis of how to actually slow down any sort of climate disaster events. And I'm proud to say that we've gotten to 130,000 hectares just in 5 years because of, I think often we look at technology and we know that there's this kind of nuance between the environmental impact that's happening and perhaps how we can actually close that loop with technology. One of my favorite concepts in Indigenous conservation is something called permaculture, which is how can we use problems to become solutions? And we think this is one facet of that. Outside of that, across our communities, we've gotten 31 companies engaged, 373 fellows placed, and 14 countries served. So let's start kind of, at that base level of how are we creating this impact in community, and perhaps how can we plug in with what you're doing? So with that sort of conservation in mind, you have something called traditional ecological knowledge, which is basically understanding different ecosystems and how things can tie in together. While this may be a practice that is really well known across Indigenous communities, sometimes there's a gap explaining this impact to like government institutions. And so the project areas that we have worked on is something called like as discussed earlier with Richard, IoT devices, which help us actually monitor the amazing work that, you know, tribes and nations and land trusts are doing all over the world, but also engage in like satellite data from things like the Google Earth Engine API so that we can also help predict certain events. It ends up creating this dashboard and visualization that can, you know, text updates if like any like levels are rising of like pollution, or if like, you know, there's like precipitation headed our way, et cetera. And overall, we're also able to impact out things like the reforestation in terms of volume of canopy and things like that. What that allows us to do is now translate the work that tribes and frontline communities are doing, who are the most impacted by climate change, right? Into the numbers that government institutions can understand. For example, for the Klamath River with the Yurok and Hupa tribe, they were trying to help governments understand why, you know, preserving the salmon was so important and that we should not build you know, a dam that like disrupts the passageway of the salmon and how important they are to the reforestation around. And with that particular impact assessment, the salmon were allowed to keep their natural waterways, and this area had been struck with like low rivers for like decades. And with the return of the salmon, we're starting to see the return of all of the vegetation as well. So I forgot, we're not pausing for questions. The next aspect of this is that sort of community-led innovation. Now connecting local, you know, students, you know, like career changers to make their entrance in tech through a way that's meaningful and impactful to them. We host a cohort that's 12-week immersive, where people get to hear from industry experts, they get to work on these projects that we just talked about and learn to share their story. And it's really beautiful because, you know, this is how we get to unite more than 14 countries, and actually have noticed that fellows learning how to interact with people on different time zones, how to do that sort of async communication, actually gives them a very close experience to what they will be doing once they enter, you know, the workforce. And it shows in terms of like 88% of our fellows actually land a role within 3 months, which is fantastic, even in this landscape. And, you know, with our surveys, we found that one, you know, having industry experts as mentors gives them these like leading understandings of like compliance and like scaling, and it takes their knowledge from, you know, maybe just like an individual project to what it's like working with a team, what it's like facing issues like budget or deadlines, and having those like millions of users that are going to be relying on this project creates a sense of excitement that they get to unfold in their interview journey, in their resume story, and their digital footprint on things like LinkedIn and X. And we've been really excited to kind of see the testimonials that come in as people land these jobs, and, you know, continue to become maintainers for us, which kind of leads us to the third aspect. Everything has been this layered community, right? And we, like all concepts of open source, we want to pay that forward, especially if you are running an OSPO at a university or at a, you know, government institution or even a company. This allows you to kind of have either our workflows or community formats to engage more people while also making that local impact. Because remember, it's a through line. All of our projects are connected to either like NGOs, scientists, land trusts who need this data to power the amazing work that they're doing. The second aspect of this is, you know, maybe you're trying to engage students and communities as, you know, you are trying to resource either people who are working in public sector or people who are working in your enterprise space. And so we are across more than 14 countries, both in our land projects as well as our student networks. And we believe that like our goals might align based on things like our fellow communities that we can throw events for, you know, potentially projects that we can help maintain for you, because we have 922 active maintainers today, and also companies that can maybe, you know, put on these sorts of hackathons for like your universities and things like that. And a good case example of this is just actually last month, we threw this hackathon with the USCIS University in Florianopolis and Brazil. And GitHub actually sponsored this hackathon because they really wanted to support the work of Carla, who is a scientist in Manaus, and also worked for the government for some time and saw this need to use data in order to create alerts about like the Rio Negro. And so, you know, with the sort of like open source infrastructure that we built, she became not just one person working on this project, but actually 300 plus people working on this project. And what was great was that, you know, we set up all of the infrastructure, even how, you know, even early career developers can start contributing just with a few lines of code, a few, you know, prompts later. And we were able to, you know, basically diffuse this very complex infrastructure, which stood as a blocker for Carla to open source because she didn't want, you know, the compliance aspects to be in violation. So we helped set up this infrastructure that is GDPR compliant, that is SOC 1 compliant, that is SOC 2 compliant, and also allowed more than 300 plus students of varying levels across their career to make their first contribution. The university said that like this is probably the first hackathon that has happened at this scale in probably 3 years. Usually they don't have someone who can set up this infrastructure, nor is it like easy enough for someone who's early career to not get overwhelmed by, you know, what it takes to contribute. So we see that as a win, and that's something that we want to do in more locations, more like quite dimensional in terms of all the things that we do here at ProgramEarth. So, but we hope that that kind of allows you to see yourself as part of our village. So whether you are someone working on a climate project alone and you would love, you know, like a community that shares your values, and also can, you know, offer their expertise around compliance and safety and data protection, or if, you know, you are a fellow who's watching this, a potential fellow or a student partner that's looking to have a hands-on experience that does allow things to be accessible, that does, you know, think about the elements of humanness and how everything should be a welcoming experience and easy to adopt. That's something that, you know, we're here to also work with you on. And if you happen to also be an organization that would like to sponsor a student community and a climate project through a hackathon, we'd love to talk with you. And yeah, I'm pretty much open for questions at this point. If any of those avenues of collaboration seem like something that we want to explore together, or if you just want, you know, access to our repos so that you can clone them and, you know, start work, we are here at either ProgramEarth.org, the website. I'll also drop in our LinkedIn, just so that it's easier for folks. We have a lot of community events, so we'd love to have you, you know, be in person even in our hackathons or our land events that we do. And also you are free to add me as well if that is an easier point of contact. But thank you so much for the time, Open Knowledge Foundation, and I'm super excited seeing all the cool work everyone is doing. I honestly think that open source is that bridge. Like there's a lot going on in this world. There's a lot of inequities maybe stacked, but open source is that belief in returning technology back to the people, and I've really enjoyed seeing all the examples of that today.
Thank you so much, Manisha. This was an amazing presentation. I loved a lot of the concepts that you shared, including the permaculture example. There are a couple of questions that were asked for you in the notes, if you go to the bottom of it. But maybe I'll ask you if it's fine for you to reply in writing because we're super late on our schedule. I hope you don't mind. So that meanwhile, we can move maybe to the next session. If you go to the shared notes, you will find them there. If not, if you don't find them, I can also copy them in the chat as well.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I'll hand it over to Lucas to move on to the next session. Thanks, everyone.